The original Resident Evil 4 is known to be the most influential third-person shooter of all time, while also belonging to one of the longest... Oh, wait a minute. This is the same redundant-ass intro I used in my last Resident Evil video. It's Game of the Year season, so I thought that it's time to talk about my personal Game of the Year, Resident Evil 4 Remake. I am pretty horror adverse when it comes to video games, but when I played Resident Evil HD a few months ago for the first time, my eyes were opened. It was the perfect tone setter for the series, and it transformed the way that I approach Resident Evil. I had owned Resident Evil 2 Remake for years, but would always get too frightened by the garage section and chicken out. But with ReHD recontextualizing my perception of the series, I was able to push through. It is now one of my favorite games of all time. Some might notice that I haven't done a Resident Evil 2 Remake review yet, and believe you me, it'll come one day. But it just goes to show how much I need to talk about this game. Before I say what I'm going to say, know that, before this point, I had never played the original Resident Evil 4. The only RE game that I'd played before this was Resident Evil 5, which I loved at the time. The co-op was something else. Anyway, I don't have any special love for the original and haven't had the time to give it a proper go yet. I got up to the castle and had a fun time, but to me, Resident Evil 4 Remake is the definitive version. After this point, I won't be referencing the original much, so whether I say RE4, Resident Evil, Gerbjalop, or RE4R, know that I'm referring to the remake. So with that out of the way, let us get started, because I think Gerbjalop is the most expressive, action-packed, and tense third-person action game in existence. Every moment from beginning to end is tuned impeccably. In Resident Evil 4, you play as Special Agent Leon S. Kennedy, who has been sent alone on a mission to rescue the president's daughter from a rural Spanish town. I'm not even going to pause on the ridiculousness here, because I'm late to this party, and I'm sure all of you have gotten over the insanity of that setup already. We are off to a flying start. The game opens up with a cult doing some kind of a ritual to a woman, giving us an idea of the kind of spook we are going up against. After this, our hero, Leon S. Kennedy, gives us a bit of a rundown of the last game he appeared in, Resident Evil 2. He was a cop on his first day when a zombie outbreak overtook not only the police station he was to start at, but the city as a whole. He and Claire Redfield fight their way through the station and discover the source of the outbreak, an underground laboratory. This is a central theme to Resident Evil: zombies and monsters created by scientific hubris and corporate greed, and while the setting has completely changed, that is still the case here. Leon is escorted by two local law officers into the village where Ashley, the president's daughter, was last seen. One of the officers breaks off to take a piss, and when he doesn't come back, that is our horror cliché cue to get the action started. As we delve deeper, we find that we've stumbled into an entire village of cultists, and they aren't going down without a fight. It's important, or maybe not important at all, to note that we are no longer dealing with any form of zombies we've seen before in other Resident Evils. These zombies have been infected with an ancient parasite that has been kept in amber. Anyway, Leon S. Kennedy, being the absolute bad boy of justice that he is, decides that it's not enough to rescue the president's daughter, but he wants to tear down this whole rotten operation. We find out, of course, that the Umbrella Corp has something to do with it all. The story is confusing, but piecing it together in my head, Umbrella was the one keeping the Los Illuminados cult we find in the game in check. But with the company's dissolution, it has let the man at the head of the cult, Adam Sandler, run wild with power. Ivan Ooze over here wants to infect the president's daughter with a parasite so he can send her back to America and infect the president himself so that he can have some more purple velvet robes or something. It's all stupid and camp, but acted with the utmost seriousness, and in turn, is delightful. There isn't anything that'll make you think here, but this is an action game and I command you to turn your brain off, lest you get into Resident Evil lore. This may come as a surprise, but Resident Evil 4 plays like every other third-person shooter that has come out in the past 18 years. And that is no coincidence. The original basically birthed the genre. You'll run around, shoot enemies, explore levels, and collect treasures to upgrade your equipment. I said in my Alan Wake review that the best metric to measure a shooter is how it feels to actually shoot things. Reactivity and player expression are crucial to the genre. When I shoot an enemy in the leg, I want to see them fall or limp a little. When I shoot an enemy's weapon in its hand, I want to see that enemy disarmed. I also want to be able to use the environment to sway the battle in my favor. RE4 has all of these things in spades. There are around a dozen weapons to work with, all favoring various kinds of playstyles, and levels in the game are designed in clever ways to encourage their use, but you're never prescribed any single tactic. This game is extremely successful at allowing you to play the way you want to. While being the blueprint that most other third-person shooters base their designs on, the combat in RE4 is anything but generic. It has several mechanics that contribute to what I consider an organic system of comboing. As I previously mentioned, enemies react in ways that seem logical, such as shots on weak points stunning enemies or being able to shoot weapons out of their hands. Once an enemy is stunned, you are then able to perform a special melee attack which will knock them over. If they aren't dead yet, you can pull out your knife and start stabbing them until they are. If you did enough damage to kill them, there is a chance they may come back to life stronger, meaning you'll need to prioritize finishing off that enemy or suffer the consequences. It all just flows in this way that feels natural and, the keyword of the day, expressive. It's why this game is so replayable. Something that Capcom does well in most of their games is that the power creep is both intrinsic and extrinsic. Not only are you leveling up your equipment, but leveling up yourself too. Combined with the game's fantastic encounter design, there is this rhythm that feels so good in the hands. In a single combat, you are making countless small decisions that you need to be able to adjust at a moment's notice. You also look completely badass while doing it, which feels earned. The same way that it feels earned when you die and get a brutal death scene. Levels in RE4 are large and semi-open. They are well directed so that you'll most likely never get lost, and the intuitive map helps you discern which areas you have and haven't cleared out yet. There is such joy to be had clearing out these levels and then scouring them for resources and collectibles that the game left for you in case you ran out during a fight. There are heaps of ways to approach the same fight, and that's where the expression of play comes in. One of the first scenes in RE4 has you facing off against an endless horde of villagers, with no escape from the level. The first time through this was thrilling, and the 50th time just as much so. There are buildings you can enter, ladders you can kick down, and environmental hazards to exploit. Enemies chase you around the scene, acting as a lighter underneath your toes. This feeling extends throughout the entire game, and most areas will have some kind of subtle gimmick, either in the level or encounter design, that keeps things from ever feeling like a generic third-person shooter. Personally, I see each little section of the game the same way I do levels in a platformer. Leon is Mario, and the Los Illuminados cult are Goombas to be stomped. While known as a horror franchise, I'd consider RE4 more horror-themed. There are scary parts, and if the word Regenador means anything to you, you know what I'm talking about. But the game skews more on the gruesome side. Swathes of blood, gore, stabbings and suplexes, so if you're not into that, I don't even know how you found this video. The tension comes more from the combat sequences, the stress of prioritizing targets with a limited field of view. It's its own kind of survival horror. The economy of RE4 is robust. There is something of an AI director monitoring your supplies and doling them out appropriately to ensure you never have too much or too little. Treasures and secrets found around the levels act as a way for you to circumvent this curve, as they're always going to be there every run. There are a couple boss fights in the game, but I found them to be quite unremarkable. They are cool as set pieces, but the only one I enjoy doing is the first one with Big Daddy Mendez. There are no fights that I actively dread, so that's something. At the end of the game, you'll get your playtime and a ranking. The game exists in this sweet spot where a full run of it never feels like it'll take that long, and trying to beat your best time only adds to an already swelling tension. This continues into the game's mercenary mode, which admittedly I don't care all that much for. These are levels based on areas in the game that allow you to play as other characters from the story against waves of enemies. You get a couple minutes to try and get as high of a score as possible, finding supplies and power-ups throughout the level. Killing in various ways will put more time on the clock, allowing for you to further extend your score. This mode is fun, but it lacks the carefully placed enemies and mix-ups that the campaign has. It does serve as a good showcase for the enemy and level variety though. This is great if you only have a few minutes, but even the best combat mechanics in a game won't shine when the encounter design is lacking. Still, I won't knock points off the game for having a fun extra mode that clearly care went into. I should mention that this game is packed to the brim with in-game challenges to complete, which earns you a currency you can then spend on new costumes, equipment, and 3D models which you can then view on a model viewer. Resident Evil has always been great by providing 3D models to the player. I think the only thing I can criticize is that perhaps the third section on the island is a bit bland, and I never look forward to doing it. Something about pushing the turrets around just irks me, and the enemies with the shock prods can just fuck off. The RE engine continues to wow here, creating an impenetrable atmosphere. The game exists in 3 biomes, the village, the castle, and the island, all with their distinct characteristics that help break up the game. Like always, I don't feel like I have that much to say presentation-wise, and aesthetic is one of the most subjective things to judge, so I hope you all get a good look during this video. It's frustrating, maybe I'm a bad critic, but I ain't got nothing to criticize here. It's just drop-dead gorgeous. A beautiful blend of stylism and realism that never touches into the uncanny valley territory. The village is dingy, the castle is opulent, and the island is oppressive. There is a great deal of variety in the visual clutter that you'll encounter, and it is all appreciated. It gives each section a feeling of uniqueness. This extends to the enemy design as well. There are loads of variations on each basic enemy type, and every area has enemies that will only be found there. The sound design, like all the remakes, is also fantastic. I cannot express to you how long I've wanted to, but never been able to enjoy Resident Evil until this year. The oppressive sound design was a big part of it. Anyone who's seen any of my reviews knows that the most important thing sound-wise is the gun sounds, and RE4 passes that with flying colours. The voice acting and music in the game are fine, but unless you're using the deluxe edition OG soundtrack, there is nothing that stands out in either category. The UI is packed with a bunch of familiar sounds which should provide a sense of homeliness to series veterans. Overall, I had an absolute blast with the RE4 remake, clocking in a total of 70 hours playtime and loving every minute of it. It's a game that I don't think I'll ever uninstall, as it's just such a blast to load up and put Leon through a bit of a workout. It's got beautiful graphics, tons of replayability, and Jerb Jlop in either of its forms remains the best third-person shooters of all time and my personal game of the year. Sorry Astarion, Alan, but the S in Leon S. Kennedy stands for sexy. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you next video.